The sky above Tau 7 was a dull, blistering orange, its sun hanging like a swollen wound in the atmosphere. The land stretched out endlessly in every direction, a desolate wasteland of jagged rocks, dust storms, and a horizon that seemed to melt into the shimmering heat. The only sound was the dry whisper of the wind scraping across the cracked earth. Drake Varro adjusted the protective mask over his face, shielding himself from the abrasive dust that stung like needles. His long coat, once black but now bleached to a dusty gray, flapped behind him as he trudged forward. His water canister was nearly empty, and the blistering heat had turned his lips into parched strips of skin. But he pressed on, driven by a combination of necessity and sheer stubbornness. He was a scavenger, one of the few who dared to roam the surface of Tau 7. Once a vibrant planet teeming with life, it was now a graveyard, ravaged by centuries of war, resource extraction, and neglect. Most had left when the last colony ships departed for better prospects in the Outer Rim, but Drake had chosen to stay behind. Or rather, he had nowhere else to go. The beeping of his scanner broke through the oppressive silence. The device, an old relic from his days as a cargo runner, flashed a weak signal on its cracked screen. It was picking up traces of metal beneath the sand, an anomaly in the otherwise barren landscape. Drake's pulse quickened. Scrap metal could mean valuable parts to trade for food, water, or fuel cells, anything to keep surviving in this forsaken land. With practiced efficiency, Drake pulled a collapsible shovel from his pack and began to dig, the coarse sand flying in all directions. After several minutes, the tip of a metallic surface glinted under the harsh sunlight. Wiping sweat from his brow, Drake cleared away more sand, revealing a twisted hulk of what looked like a small shuttle. The edges were charred and melted, as if it had crash-landed and burned on impact. "Must have been here for years," Drake muttered to himself, his voice muffled by the mask. The ship was half buried, its hull shattered and scorched. Whatever it once carried was likely long gone, looted by scavengers or swallowed by the desert. But as he moved closer, he noticed something that made him pause. The faint, flickering glow of a distress beacon was still active. "Impossible," he whispered, crouching down to get a better look. The beacon's light pulsed weakly, barely visible in the harsh daylight, suggesting it was running on emergency power. If the beacon was still operational, it meant there might be survivors, or at least, something left inside worth salvaging. Drake's instincts screamed at him to turn away. Distress beacons usually attracted the wrong kind of attention. Raiders, scavengers, or worse, the nomadic slavers who prowled the wasteland for desperate souls. But a different part of him, the part that remembered what it was like to need help, urged him forward. He pried open the side hatch with a crowbar, the metal groaning in protest. The interior was a ruin of wires, broken glass, and scorched panels. The smell of burnt circuitry and stale air filled his nostrils. It was dark inside, save for the soft, flickering light of the beacon, casting erratic shadows that danced like phantoms. As Drake navigated through the cramped corridors of the wreck, his boot kicked something soft. He looked down to see a hand gray with dust, but unmistakably human. His heart skipped a beat. Whoever it belonged to was still alive, their fingers twitching faintly. Kneeling down, Drake checked for a pulse. It was weak, but there. The figure, a woman, was covered in grime, her face obscured by tangled hair and dirt-streaked goggles. As he shook her gently, she coughed, her eyes fluttering open, revealing a pair of piercing blue irises. "Where?" she croaked, her voice barely a whisper. "Easy there," Drake said, offering her a canteen. "Drink. Don't try to talk." The woman gulped down the water desperately, her cybernetic arm twitching as she grasped the canteen. Drake noted the exposed wires and damaged plating. Whoever she was, she'd been through hell. "More, inside," she managed to say, her voice growing faint again. Drake's gaze snapped to the back of the shuttle. He hadn't seen anyone else, but the ship was larger than he initially thought. Navigating through the wreckage, he found two more bodies slumped against the far wall. One was a young man, his bare arms covered in intricate tattoos that seemed to glow faintly even in the dark. The other was an alien A species Drake couldn't immediately recognize, with translucent skin that reflected the sparse light like liquid glass. Both were unconscious, their breathing shallow. They looked worse off than the woman. Whoever they were in no condition to survive another hour in the sweltering heat outside. Drake's mind raced. He had barely enough supplies for himself, let alone 3 strangers. Leaving them here would mean certain death, but saving them would be a gamble, one that might cost him his own life. The smart thing to do was to take what he could carry and leave them to their fate. Yet, as he looked down at their fragile forms, something in him rebelled against the idea. Damn it, he cursed under his breath. He couldn't do it. Maybe it was foolishness, or maybe it was the ghost of the man he used to be, but he couldn't just walk away. With a grunt of effort, Drake hoisted the unconscious young man over his shoulder and helped the woman to her feet. The alien, Vex, as he would later learn, was lighter than he looked, almost weightless, as if his bones were made of something other than solid matter. It took all of Drake's strength to drag them through the sandstorm that had begun to brew outside, the wind howling like a beast hungry for prey. By the time he reached his hidden underground shelter, Drake was drenched in sweat, his muscles screaming in protest. The entrance was cleverly concealed beneath a pile of scrap metal, leading to a small subterranean hideout he had carved out over the years. It wasn't much, but it was safe from the blistering sun and marauding raiders. He laid them down on makeshift beds made of old thermal blankets, checking their vitals again. The woman's cybernetic limbs were glitching badly, and the alien skin was beginning to crack from dehydration. The young man's tattoos flickered erratically, as if whatever power they held was struggling to keep him alive. As Drake worked to stabilize them, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just invited a world of trouble into his solitary existence. But it was too late now. Whatever their story was, he would find out soon enough. The wasteland was vast, cold, and unforgiving, but for the first time in years, Drake wasn't alone. The underground hideout was dimly lit by old solar-powered lamps Drake had salvaged from wrecked starships. The air was cooler here, away from the scorching surface of Tau 7, but still carried the acrid tang of metal and dust. Drake's shelter was a haphazard mix of salvaged parts, old tech, and makeshift repairs. It was small but functional, filled with supplies he'd scraped together over the years, enough to keep himself alive, but just barely. Now, however, it was crowded. The 3 strangers lay on makeshift cots, their breathing slow and shallow, the sounds of their ragged breaths echoing in the confined space. The woman, Lyra, was the first to regain consciousness, her eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. She tried to sit up, but a sharp pain shot through her cybernetic arm, which was sparking and twitching uncontrollably. Drake, seated on an overturned crate nearby, watched her struggle with a mix of curiosity and wariness. "Easy," he said gruffly, holding out a piece of dried food. "You'll tear those circuits apart if you move too quickly." Lyra's eyes narrowed, her suspicion clear. Where are we?" she demanded, her voice hoarse. "Safe, for now," Drake replied. "Found you in the wreck of your ship, half buried in the sand. You're lucky I came along." "Lucky," she snorted bitterly, her cybernetic hand sparking as she tried to move it. "We were ambushed by raiders. They shot us down. If you're another scavenger looking for easy loot, you're wasting your time." Drake ignored the accusation and nodded toward the others. "Who are they?" Lyra's gaze softened, just for a moment. "That's Aaron," she said, nodding toward the young man covered in tattoos, who was still unconscious. "And that one's Vex. We were on a mission, something that could change everything, if we survived long enough to complete it." "What kind of mission?" Drake pressed, his curiosity getting the better of him. Lyra hesitated, her blue eyes searching his face for any sign of betrayal. After a moment, she seemed to decide he was no immediate threat. "We were searching for an ancient terraforming device. There are rumors that it's hidden somewhere on this blasted rock. If it's real, it could bring life back to dead worlds like this one." Drake stared at her, disbelief written across his face. A terraforming device? That's a myth. I've been roaming these wastelands for years, and I've never seen anything that could do that. It's not a myth, Lyra insisted, her voice fierce. We had coordinates. We were close before the raiders hit us. Drake wasn't convinced, but he kept his thoughts to himself. Myths and legends were the lifeblood of desperate people, something to cling to when reality offered only dust and death. Still, if there was even a grain of truth to her story, it might be worth looking into. The alien, Vex, stirred next, his translucent skin shimmering faintly in the low light. When he opened his eyes, they were like liquid pools of light, reflecting the lamp's glow. Vex didn't speak immediately but stared at Drake with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Can you understand me?" Drake asked cautiously. Vex nodded slowly, his voice entering Drake's mind rather than his ears, a soft, resonant sound that sent a shiver down Drake's spine. "Yes, I hear you. Thank you for saving us." Drake rubbed the back of his neck. He had encountered telepaths before, but they were rare and usually avoided the wasteland. He wondered what kind of trouble this group had gotten into to end up here. "How badly are you hurt?" Drake asked Vex aloud, unsure if the alien could read all his thoughts or just the ones directed at him. Vex's answer came both mentally and verbally this time. "Dehydration, damage to my core structure," he said, his voice a whisper in the air and a hum in Drake's mind. "But I will recover if we have water." Skin. Drake noticed they seemed to shift, almost alive, reacting to his surroundings. He'd never seen anything like it. Lyra, noticing his interest, spoke up. "Aaron's a star shaman. Or at least, that's what his people call him. Those markings on his skin? They're conduits for energy he can tap into the electromagnetic fields of planets, ships, even people." Drake raised an eyebrow, skepticism plain on his face. "Sounds like a bunch of mystical nonsense." "Believe what you want," Lyra shot back. "He saved our skins more than once with those abilities. He was trying to shield us when the raiders attacked, but he was overwhelmed. Too many of them." As if on cue, Aaron groaned and began to stir. His eyes opened, revealing a vibrant, electric blue that seemed to glow in the dim light. He tried to sit up but winced, clutching his head. "Take it easy," Drake said, moving to help him. "You're safe here, for now." Aaron blinked, disoriented, before his gaze fixed on Lyra. "Did we make it? Are we near the coordinates?" he asked, his voice weak but determined. "Not yet," she replied, her voice softening for the first time. "We're still alive, though, thanks to our new friend here." Aaron's eyes flickered toward Drake, a flicker of gratitude visible behind the exhaustion. "Thank you," he managed, his voice a rasp. "But we need to move quickly. The raiders, they were after the same thing we are. If they find it first dash." Drake held up a hand, cutting him off. "Slow down. You're not going anywhere in your condition. Rest, eat, and then you can tell me what this is all about. I didn't pull you out of that wreck just to watch you drop dead in my hideout." The group exchanged glances, and for the first time, Drake saw something he hadn't expected: trust. They were desperate, that much was clear, but desperation had a way of breaking down barriers. For now, they had no choice but to rely on him. The following days passed in a tense, uneasy truce. Drake shared his limited supplies, tending to their wounds with whatever rudimentary medical equipment he had scavenged. Lyra's cybernetic arm was the most challenging repair. The exposed wiring and damaged servos were beyond anything Drake was used to. Still, with Lyra guiding him through the process, they managed to stabilize the worst of it. Vex, on the other hand, recovered surprisingly quickly once he had enough water. His ability to communicate telepathically made him invaluable, especially in coordinating their limited resources without drawing too much attention from the surface. As for Aaron, he spent most of his time in meditation, his tattoos glowing softly as he reached out with whatever energy field he claimed to connect with. Drake was still skeptical, but the air around Aaron seemed to hum faintly whenever he was focused, and more than once, the hideout's lights flickered in response. On the third night, as the others rested, Lyra approached Drake where he sat keeping watch by the entrance. The moonlight from the surface reflected off her cybernetic arm, casting an eerie glow. "I owe you," she said quietly, her tone more serious than before. "You could have left us out there, but you didn't. And for that, thank you." Drake shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "You'd have done the same for me, right?" Lyra hesitated, then smiled wryly. "No. I probably would have looted you and kept moving." Drake couldn't help but chuckle. Fair enough. But as they shared a rare moment of levity, a warning blip sounded from Drake's old scanner. The distress beacon from their crashed ship had gone silent, replaced by a new signal one that was getting closer. Drake's heart sank as he recognized it, the telltale signature of a raider convoy. Their enemies were closing in, and this time, there would be no place to hide. The hideout was suddenly filled with a tense, electric silence. Drake's old scanner beeped incessantly, its screen displaying the approach of multiple signals. The raiders had found them. They were moving fast, their convoy a black cloud of dust and roaring engines hurtling toward Drake's underground shelter. "They're here," Drake muttered, his voice grim. Lyra's eyes hardened. She clenched her newly repaired cybernetic arm, testing its movements. "How much time do we have?" "Not enough," Drake replied. 10 minutes, maybe less." Vex closed his eyes, reaching out telepathically to assess the approaching threat. "I sense at least a dozen of them," he reported, his voice a whisper in their minds. "Heavily armed. They know we're here." Aaron's tattoos flickered as he concentrated, his brow furrowed. "I can try to disrupt their scanners, buy us a few minutes," he said. "But it won't stop them for long." "Do it," Lyra commanded. "We need every second." As Aaron focused, his tattoos glowed brighter, casting an ethereal light around the small shelter. Drake watched in awe as the air seemed to ripple and hum. The young man's energy pulsed outward, a faint wave that distorted the electromagnetic field surrounding their hideout. For a moment, the beeping on Drake's scanner stopped. "That won't hold them for long," Drake said, grabbing his pack and a rifle. "We need to move now." Lyra turned to Vex. "Is there a way out of here that won't lead us right into their arms?" Vex's eyes glazed over, his consciousness extending beyond the walls of their underground refuge. "There's an old tunnel system beneath us," he said, voice both calm and otherworldly. "It connects to the surface further west, beyond the raiders' current position." "Good," Lyra nodded. "We'll take the tunnels. But once we're out, we head straight for the Oasis." Drake shot her a doubtful look. "The Oasis? You still think it's real?" "We're running out of options, and I'm not risking my neck for some fairy tale." Lyra's gaze was steely. "It's not a fairy tale. I've seen the coordinates. If we reach it, we'll have a chance. If not, we're dead either way." Drake sighed. "Fine, but if this oasis doesn't exist, you're buying us all a drink in hell." The tunnels beneath the hideout were narrow, dark, and stifling. Drake led the way, his old flashlight flickering as its power pack struggled to keep up. Behind him, Lyra kept her blaster ready, while Aaron brought up the rear, his tattoos glowing just enough to light their path. The air was thick with dust, and the walls were slick with condensation, remnants of a time when water had flowed freely beneath Tau 7's surface. Vex moved with an otherworldly grace, his translucent skin shimmering faintly, guiding them through the labyrinth of tunnels with an instinct that seemed more than natural. After what felt like hours, they emerged from the tunnels into the open air. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the desert. For a moment, the oppressive heat lessened, replaced by the cool whisper of twilight. "There," Lyra said, pointing to the horizon where a jagged ridge of cliffs loomed in the distance. "That's where the oasis is supposed to be. If we can get there before nightfall, we might stand a chance." Aaron closed his eyes, feeling the planet's energy beneath his feet. I can sense something, he said slowly. It's faint, but there's a pulse. It feels alive. Drake shook his head, still skeptical but willing to trust their instincts for now. They had no other options. The raiders would be upon them soon, and this ridge was their only hope. As they made their way toward the cliffs, the desert seemed to come alive. Strange creatures skittered out of sight, their eyes glowing in the gathering darkness. The ground trembled occasionally, as if something massive was shifting beneath the sand. Lyra scanned the horizon constantly, her instincts honed from years of combat. We're being watched, she said quietly. Vex nodded, his telepathic senses tingling. I can feel something. Not raiders, but curious. Hungry. Great, Drake muttered. As if the raiders weren't enough, now we've got the local wildlife on our tail. They pressed on, their pace quickening as the temperature plummeted with the setting sun. Just as the first stars began to twinkle in the dusky sky, they reached the base of the cliffs. A narrow path, half hidden by rock formations, wound its way upward. This way, Lyra urged. The coordinates lead us up there. The climb was treacherous. Loose rocks crumbled underfoot, and the wind howled through the crevices, threatening to knock them off balance. Aaron stumbled, nearly falling over the edge, but Drake caught him just in time. Careful, kid, Drake grunted, pulling him back. Would hate to lose our mystic before we see if this oasis is real. Aaron gave a shaky nod, too exhausted to respond. Vex, meanwhile, seemed invigorated, his skin glowing brighter with each step. We're close, he said, his voice tinged with excitement. I can feel water. Life. As they crested the final rise, they were met with a sight that took their breath away. Below them, hidden within the rocky embrace of the cliffs, lay a verdant valley. Trees with lush, emerald leaves swayed gently in the breeze, and crystal-clear streams flowed through the grass like veins of silver. Drake's eyes widened. By the stars, it's real. Lyra's expression softened, relief washing over her features. I told you. But before they could savor the moment, a loud roar erupted behind them. The raiders had found their trail. Engines roared as their vehicle scaled the cliffs, the sound of gunfire echoing in the narrow canyon. We have to get down there, Lyra shouted. Now! The group scrambled down the rocky slope, dodging laser fire as the raiders closed in. Aaron, his tattoos glowing fiercely, turned to face the oncoming attackers. He raised his hands, and the air around him crackled with energy. A wave of force erupted from his palms, sending several raiders flying off their vehicles. Drake and Lyra reached the edge of the oasis first, diving into the cool waters of a shallow stream for cover. Vex followed, using his telepathy to confuse the minds of the remaining raiders, buying them precious seconds. The battle was fierce. Lyra fought with the ferocity of a soldier who had nothing left to lose, her cybernetic arm smashing through raider armor. Drake picked off enemies from a distance with his rifle, each shot precise and deadly. Aaron's energy manipulations grew wilder, the air around him sparking with power, while Vex's telepathic assaults left the raiders disoriented. As the last raider fell, the group collapsed onto the soft grass, panting and exhausted. For a moment, all was silent except for the gentle trickle of water and the rustle of leaves. The oasis had protected them, its natural barriers proving too much for the raiders to overcome. Is it over? Aaron asked, his voice barely a whisper. For now, Drake said, wiping the sweat from his brow. But they'll be back. They always come back. Lyra, still catching her breath, nodded. Then we'll be ready. But first, we need to find that terraforming device. If we can get it working, this oasis can expand. We can hold this ground. Drake looked around at the lush greenery and the clear blue waters, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, hope. For the first time, it seemed like there might be more to life than just survival. But as they turned toward the heart of the oasis, where ancient structures lay hidden beneath the dense foliage, none of them could shake the feeling that they were being watched. Deep within the oasis, something stirred, a presence older than any of them could fathom. And it had waited a long time for visitors. The air within the oasis was cool and fragrant, filled with the scent of strange, flowering plants that glowed faintly in the darkening twilight. For the first time in what felt like years, Drake Varro took a deep breath without tasting dust. The lush greenery, the sound of water trickling over stones, and the gentle rustle of leaves created a surreal atmosphere so different from the harsh wasteland they had left behind. Yet, despite the apparent serenity, there was an unspoken tension among the group. The oasis, though beautiful, felt like it was holding its breath, as if it were aware of their presence. Shadows seemed to shift on their own, and the air thrummed with an energy that made the hair on Drake's arm stand on end. "Stay close," Lyra said, her cybernetic arm humming softly as it charged up. "We don't know what else might be lurking here." The group moved cautiously, keeping their weapons ready. Vex's eyes gleamed with an otherworldly light as he scanned the surroundings, his telepathic senses probing the depths of the oasis. Aaron walked with a look of awe, his tattoos glowing steadily as they seemed to draw power from the vibrant energy around them. "It's like the planet is alive here," Aaron murmured, placing a hand on the trunk of a strange tree. "I can feel it pulsing beneath my skin." Drake shook his head, still struggling to believe what he was seeing. "So this is your fabled oasis," he said to Lyra, his voice tinged with disbelief. "But where's this terraforming device you promised? If we don't find it soon, the raiders will regroup." Lyra's jaw tightened, her eyes scanning the dense jungle-like growth. "The coordinates led us here. The device must be hidden deeper in. We have to keep moving." The heart of the oasis. As they ventured further into the oasis, the terrain became more treacherous. The lush vegetation gave way to ancient ruins partially swallowed by the earth. Crumbling stone arches and half-buried obelisks, etched with strange symbols, jutted out from the ground like the bones of some forgotten civilization. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to hum with a strange, almost sentient energy. Vex paused, his eyes glowing brighter as he touched one of the ancient stones. "This place, it's old. Far older than anything I've ever encountered," he said, his voice both spoken and telepathic. "It's like the land itself remembers." "Remembers what?" Drake asked, wiping sweat from his brow as the humidity intensified. "Pain. Loss. Something was taken from this place long ago," Vex whispered, his voice trailing off as if listening to echoes only he could hear. As they reached the center of the oasis, the foliage thinned out to reveal a massive structure, half covered in vines and moss. It was a domed building made of a smooth, iridescent material that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. The ground beneath their feet was cool, and the air was filled with the faint sound of a low, rhythmic thrum, like the heartbeat of the planet itself. "There," Lyra said, pointing toward the entrance. "That's where the signal is coming from." Aaron's tattoos flared brightly as they neared the structure, responding to whatever energy source was hidden within. "This is it," he said, his voice filled with awe. "The device is inside. I can feel its power." But as they approached the entrance, the ground trembled, and the air was filled with a deep, resonant sound that sent shivers down their spines. The shimmering surface of the building rippled, and the doorway opened, revealing a vast, shadowed interior. Drake's instincts screamed danger, but it was too late to turn back now. "Let's move," he said, leading the way inside. The terraforming device. The interior of the dome was vast and dimly lit, with walls covered in alien symbols that pulsed faintly with a soft, blue light. At the center of the room stood a massive machine, its surface covered in vines and rust. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, a complex network of crystals, metal plates, and glowing conduits that seemed to reach deep into the earth. "This is it," Lyra breathed, her eyes wide. "The terraforming device." But as they approached the machine, a sudden surge of energy erupted from its core. The air crackled with power, and a deep, resonant voice filled the chamber, echoing in their minds. "Intruders, you are not welcome here." The voice was ancient, filled with a mixture of anger and sorrow. Vex recoiled, clutching his head as the telepathic force overwhelmed him. "It's alive," he gasped. "The device, it's sentient." Drake cursed under his breath. "A sentient terraforming device? Just what we needed." Aaron stepped forward, his tattoos glowing brightly. "We're not here to harm you," he said, his voice steady. "We seek to restore what was lost. This planet is dying, we can save it." The machine's voice faltered, as if considering his words. "Long have I waited, but those who came before only sought to take. How do I know you will not do the same?" Lyra stepped forward, her cybernetic arm sparking slightly. "We're different. We're not here to exploit this place. We want to bring life back, not drain it dry." There was a long, tense silence. Then, the machine's lights dimmed, and the thrumming pulse slowed. "Very well, but you must prove your worth. The process to restore this world requires energy sacrifice. If you are willing, step forward and give of yourselves. The price of redemption." Drake's eyes widened. "A sacrifice? What kind of sacrifice are we talking about?" Vex's translucent skin shimmered as he tried to interpret the machine's intent. "It's asking for a portion of our life force, our energy. It needs to connect with us to activate fully." Aaron nodded, already stepping forward. "If that's what it takes, I'll do it. This is why we came here." Lyra hesitated for a moment but then nodded, her face resolute. "We didn't come all this way to turn back now." Drake clenched his fists. He had always been a survivor, someone who looked out only for himself. But as he looked at Lyra, Aaron, and Vex, these people who had become more than just companions, he realized he had already changed. Against every instinct, he found himself stepping forward. "If we do this, there's no guarantee we'll make it," Drake said, his voice rough. "But if this works, maybe we can turn this cursed rock into something worth living on." They each placed their hands on the machine's surface. A surge of energy coursed through their bodies, drawing out a piece of their life force. It was agonizing, a feeling like being burned from the inside out. But as they gritted their teeth and held on, the machine began to glow brighter, its energy channels lighting up like veins filled with liquid fire. The ground beneath them shook, and a wave of energy pulsed outward from the machine, spreading across the oasis and beyond. The dry, cracked earth began to tremble, and with a roar like thunder, the ground split open, releasing geysers of water that soaked into the parched soil. The trees and plants around them seemed to swell with new life, their leaves turning a vibrant, emerald green. "It is done," the machine's voice said softly. "The process has begun. This world will heal, but it will take time." Drake staggered back, feeling drained but alive. Lyra, Aaron, and Vex were equally exhausted, but there was a light in their eyes that hadn't been there before. Guardians of the Oasis. The raiders never returned. The burst of energy from the machine had created a natural barrier around the Oasis, a force field that repelled anything with hostile intent. It would protect them as they worked to expand the Oasis and revive Tau 7. Days turned into weeks, and the small group began to carve out a new life in the restored valley. Lyra took charge of security, training Aaron to use his abilities in combat. Vex became the link between the machine and the land, guiding its energies to nurture new growth. Drake, ever the scavenger, used his skills to repair and repurpose old tech, turning the ruins into a livable settlement. One evening, as they stood atop a hill overlooking the now flourishing oasis, Drake turned to Lyra, Aaron, and Vex. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with a rare softness. "We actually did it." Lyra smiled, her eyes glistening. "Yeah, but this is just the beginning. There's a whole world out there waiting to be revived." Drake nodded. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of belonging, of purpose. The Wasteland had taken everything from him, but it had also given him something precious in return: companions, a new home, and a chance to build something better. They had come together in desperation, but now they were more than survivors. They were guardians of a forgotten oasis, protectors of a new hope in a broken world. And as the stars began to twinkle above the transformed landscape, Drake knew they had finally found something worth fighting for. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, it was theirs to shape.